Hey, I want to talk about Uranus right now. So, we're talking about, the planet deals with disruption, it deals with rebelliousness, it deals with, concepts of revolution, invention, it deals with, concepts that are forward thinking, futuristic, things like that. Uranus deals with areas where you're unique, you're different. I have a whole series where I talk about the planets, so I'm not going to go into Uranus through the signs or houses in the traditional way right now because there's a video about that. What I've been doing lately is I want to talk about planets in nuanced ways. I don't just want to talk about everything about Uranus or Neptune or whatever. We're going to talk about what is one way we can get really nitty gritty about some of these planets and we can use it to really help our lives and be very practical. So I want to talk about Uranus is a disruptor. So wherever it is, whatever house Uranus is in your life, that is where you're meant to disrupt certain patterns. That is where you can benefit from being a bit disruptive, a bit rebellious. And what sometimes feels wrong. I really believe unless you have heavy Aquarius placements in your chart, you might struggle with understanding the placement of Uranus in your chart or just in general because we want things neat and clean most of the time. We want things direct. But Uranus is not about being direct. It is, we have to change things in a way that is pivoting from what it is to something different. We have to be open to new ideas. We can't keep doing things the same way. It is the antithesis of Saturn. Saturn is structure. I know how to do things. There's a method to this. There's a methodology to this. There's a tradition to this. Uranus is not honoring any tradition. So wherever it is in your chart, that is the area where you will likely push back the most, but it's also where you can disrupt certain patterns or where you can even disrupt patterns in your life. Instead of looking at it as a negative, how do you look at it as an opportunity? So if you have Uranus in the first house, it's identity, disrupting ideas of who you are, concepts of what people think that you are. In early life, you'll have probably some issues understanding how to be different and understanding how to use that for your benefit. But as you can see, there are people nowadays, especially when you think of, you go on social media and you see people with a unique talent or there's something unique about their appearance, especially think of first house, which is the body, the physical, and they're able to capitalize on that. There's something that when you were younger was frowned upon or not normal, but now as an adult, you can reclaim that. So when you have Uranus in the first house, you're here to disrupt what it means to be you. Maybe in terms of like people might look at you and assume something, but that's something different. Maybe you are a person where your identity is something that helps other people feel included. Your identity, your assertion of who you are, and you embracing that helps other people see more clearly how they can also show up in the world authentically with who they are. So Uranus in the first, you are disrupting what it's expected to even look like. You might rebel against social norms and what physically you should look like or physically you should be. And so there is, you're disrupting this idea of who you are. You're born in a family where there could be certain requirements or certain expectations, but you're really here to define yourself. Okay. Uranus in the second house, you are here to disrupt patterns with money. Maybe in your family, there's a way in which people say, like, this is how you should work. Or this is the type of work you should do, or this is how you view money, and so you might need to be someone who branches out from that. And again, we're thinking of things that happen. Uranus in the second house for some people, initially could be bad. It seemed bad because it could be like, oh man, my money's up, my money's down, don't know where I'm getting money, I'm doing odd jobs, and right. But Uranus in the second house means you're here to find different ways to make money, to be inventive, to be really quick, be smart. It's not that you're workhorse energy. You might maybe in your chart you have it, but if you don't have workhorse energy in your chart, that means you're here to work smarter, not harder. So Uranus in the second house means you're here to learn how to utilize and look at money streams in different way. You might need to have additional flows. You might have to be someone who's open to changing and transitioning into different, fields and industries and things of that nature. You're here to disrupt the way people view things, even what is of value. You might be a person where you're here to appraise things, but you collect unique items. Second house is also the things that we have. It's not just the money, it's money, but the possessions, the things that we value. And so Uranus being there means you are here to disrupt things of what is of value. You're here to disrupt what it means to make money, what it looks like. But you also may inspire the people. Okay, because Uranus can also inspire the people to be different, to do the thing nobody knew anybody could do. All right. Uranus In the third house, you're here to disrupt patterns of thinking. You're here to disrupt linear thinking. You're here to disrupt the ways in which we maybe even learn. You might find a different method in school. Maybe it didn't work, them teaching you multiplication a certain way. You had a different way of doing it, or your brain wanted to do it a different way. And when you're younger, now again, education techniques are different than, when we were kids. The way math is taught is different. There are more innovative techniques. Someone that works in education, it is not the exact same as it was when we were kids. So there is a different way in which they're doing it now. But what I'm saying is, Uranus in third house, you can benefit from doing things differently. Once you get a grip on what something is, you have different ideas. Now, maybe those ideas are shut down. When you're younger, they're shut down because it doesn't follow the pattern. And people sometimes have a hard time following things that aren't linear. People have a hard time, just like people have a hard time following things that aren't physical, because when people are intuitive and they warn you and you're like, oh, I can't see it, that's the similar thing with your unique brain. Of people can't see it. They don't know what you're talking about. They don't know there's another way. So your job is to help other people see the unique way to think. Or you could be fixated on a unique topic. You share and teach people about a different topic or something that is a niche area. Now, again, you have to get really, you have to know what you're talking about first before you can front load some theory to people. I always say that, like, know what you're doing first before you start changing things. All right. Uranus in the fourth house, you are here to disrupt certain patterns in your family. You might be the first to do something. You might change the trajectory of how certain things in your family are done. You may rebel against tradition. You might be the one that leaves the nest. You might be the one where there's some type of generational, I don't say curse. I don't really use the word curse, trauma, or just something generational, even if it's something generational in terms of success, money, stability, that your family has been grappling with for, generations, that you're here to disrupt in some way. You're the one, you're going to have to view things differently. The way in which you respond to things emotionally, you can't be as tied to certain things. You're going to have to disrupt certain patterns, even if it feels sometimes like it is going against tradition or going against what everybody else did. That does not mean you might not have respect for your family. That does not mean you might not still have certain things you are carrying on. But when you have Uranus in your fourth house, you are here to disrupt certain patterns within your family. You are here to be different. You're not here to do what they did. In that way, there's something you have to have that that forward thinking mindset to say, well, I'm going to try this, and I don't care if nobody else in my family ever did it. I'm going to try it myself. Okay. Uranus in the fifth house is you're disrupting patterns around what it means to be confident, the hobbies and interests that you have. If you're a person where your parents forced you to do certain activities when you were younger and you're like, well, I'd never been like that, it's because you really have to find the thing that you like, and you have to do it in a way in which it is, you have to experiment. So Uranus in the fifth house, you're here to disrupt what it looks like, what is fun, what is interesting. You're going to be different. You might have a different approach to fun. You might have a different way in which you view those different topics. And disrupting ideas on dating, on those topics, flirting, sex, those types of things. Uranus in the fifth house, you're not doing things the way people are prescribing it to you. You might be a person where that's not even a focus area. You might be a person, even child rearing, like Uranus in the fifth house, you just may not want children. You may decide, or you have children in a different way. You're a step parent, or you work around a lot of children, or something of that nature. But Uranus in the fifth house, you're here to disrupt patterns of what people view as what you should engage in, the hobbies, the interests that you should have. You're here to disrupt this idea. You might even invent something. You might be a person where you are able to see things differently and invite a lot of people. You inspire other people because you're not someone who is following the same rules in certain things. So you might be an inventor, or you invent something, you invent a style. You're like, well, I'm not doing it like this, I'm doing it like this. And it can get you, sometimes you can get that attention from that way, especially if you talk about fifth house in terms of the sun ruling it and it being about hobbies and those things. So sixth house, Uranus in sixth house, you're here to disrupt patterns on what it looks like to have responsibilities, what it looks like to have certain tasks that you have to do. Sixth house, the house of work. So when you have Uranus there, you might not have a traditional pathway in terms of work and what it looks like. And you're here to disrupt even the ideas of what your workplace looks like. Maybe you are a person where you have ideas and you're like, no, this is not fair. This isn't right. Uranus, that rebellious energy, that I'm for the people. So Uranus in sixth house, Now what can happen early in life is it really does feel disruptive. You can't, you're late to work. You don't feel like going. It feels like oppression to you. But when you get in the groove, Uranus in the sixth house, you can create systems and routines that allow for people to still freely do what they need to do while also meeting the expectations. You don't have to feel captive to things if there's different ways to do it. So Uranus in the sixth house is you're showing other people and yourself different ways to accomplish the same tasks that have to get done. Sixth house, things have to get done. Doesn't matter how free we want to be, they're things that we need to do, right? For maintenance, sixth house is the house of maintenance. Tune it up, fix it up. But with Uranus there, you might have innovative approaches and ways to do that. And so you're the disruptor. It doesn't mean you need to go quit because you hate your job. Maybe you are proposing new ideas. Maybe you're a person where you're like, when I move up, I'm going to do things different. We can do things different around here. We don't have to have the routines the same way. I'm going to give people a little bit of freedom because I trust in people, right? And so Uranus can provide that sort of your sixth house of daily work. It's like about disrupting habits that are so routine that sometimes they're not really working. All right, Uranus in the seventh house. So when I'm talking about Uranus being a disruptor, it typically means that early in life, you are trying to adapt to what is normal. And so with Uranus being in seventh house, early in life, you're trying to identify the types of relationships that you have with people. You're trying to identify how you show up in these relationships. And you might be seeking and searching normalcy. You might be seeking and trying to replicate what you see other people doing. When we have Uranus in the seventh house, in order to capitalize on it being a disrupting agent, so to speak, you have to navigate relationships differently. And that might mean you don't follow the same formula as everyone else. It also can mean you are a person where you are supposed to experiment with different types of relationships. You might be a person where you were married before and now you are in an open relationship, or now you are, maybe you go through periods of time where you're not in a relationship, or you date different types of individuals to really understand relationships. So it's really experimental for people sometimes with Uranus in the seventh house. Now, again, we would have to look at everything else in the chart because you can have people that deny that. You can have people for years who conform and say, I'm going to date who's in my community or who's in my culture because, it's expected. But then later in life, you realize that you have a different, attraction to different types of people, or you don't want a traditional relationship. So the disruptor here, though, is you learning how to relate to people who may even be very vastly different than you, but you might be able to make it work. So it's not about looking at Uranus all the time as like this big bad wolf. Oh, I'm never going to have a stable relationship. Oh, it's always going to be strange, odd circumstances. But it is about embracing the unique journey that you have in the types of relationships and really valuing those types of relationships. So Uranus in eighth house. Again, the purpose of this video is reframing it as the disruptor and how it disrupts your life in ways, but how you can capitalize on it. So early in life, if you're talking about Uranus in the eighth house, we're talking about the eighth house, which deals with a lot of deep, intense topics. We're dealing with eighth house, which deals with the deep energy that is underneath everything. It is about joining up. It is about power, control, things that are secretive, things that require us to transform. It's a heavy house. But Uranus there can mean early in life, there's a lot of upheaval in very deep, intense emotional situations. You might go through circumstances that you didn't anticipate that you carry with you. The thing about eighth house energy, especially when we talk about it through the emotional lens or the psychological lens, this is stuff you carry with you, but it isn't always things that you confront face on. So early in life, you learned that, it's not safe sometimes to rely on your emotions, or it's not safe sometimes to hold on to something because anything could go wrong. And so you sometimes have that expectation, and you can sometimes veer away from intense feelings and situations and commitments. You can say, I don't want to commit to that because I don't know if it's going to work out for me. But if we look at Uranus as a disruptor and we think of how we can capitalize on that, you would have to understand how to seek experiences that are deeper and try them out. Commit and embed yourself in something new that requires you to stay the course, stay a long time, getting in and kind of experimenting with the different ways in which you can show up for yourself and test yourself in different ways. When we're thinking of Uranus in the eighth house, it can sometimes be you're learning how to, do things differently when it comes to how you manage and deal with deep, intense topics. If you grew up in a household where emotions weren't talked about, you're disrupting that. If you had any trauma in the past, Your job in some way is to disrupt that and work through ways in which you can regenerate yourself. You are disrupting things that have been hidden when you have Uranus in the eighth house. You could have experiences where it's like, maybe you have, again, we talk about joint assets in the eighth house. If it shows up in terms of somebody having, lying about their finances, you're here to learn, like, okay, in your next relationship or your next situation, when you combine resources, you are someone where you have a very innovative way of how to deal with your partnership. You're like, actually, I got played last time, so this is how we're handling money. So Uranus, it means eighth house. Anytime you feel this really heavy, intense feeling that is not in your control, Uranus being there means you're here to experiment and try to figure out ways in which you can control it better and experiment with different things and change. Use that as an agent for changing the trajectory of things instead of letting things happen to you. All right, Uranus in ninth house. Again, so we're starting with talking about, for each house placement, what your experience would have been like early on. Early on, Uranus in ninth is you could have experiences where you are uprooted. You are coincidentally or by chance exposed to new experiences and things and people. Somebody moves near you and you're like, oh, I learned about a new culture, a new community. You might have different belief systems than other people, and you may sometimes feel strange for having those beliefs. Sometimes depending on if you grew up really in a traditional household, you may feel sometimes punished or ostracized or, judged for having different beliefs. So Uranus in ninth house, the house can be those experiences where your exposure to things that are outside yourself are coincidental. There is in which you experiment a lot until you figure out what your purpose and journey is. So sometimes you wander aimlessly because Uranus requires us to sometimes test things out, change things up, be experimental. But when we don't know where we're going, we can end up in any situation for the thrill, right? But when you are focused and when you look at this disruptor energy of Uranus and we say, well, how do we disrupt those patterns? Uranus in ninth means you are focused on the journeys that you are going on and you know what you're trying to accomplish. When you think of an experiment or a hypothesis or anything like that, the point of an experiment isn't just the adventure, it's just the ride. The point of the experiment is, I think at the end of this, I'm going to come to a conclusion, right? So we have to start thinking of experiment. When we hear the term experimental with Uranus energy or Aquarius energy, it's this idea of like, oh, we're just going to try this new thing. And it can sometimes be, it's exhilarating. It can be like when you talk about Aquarius and Aries energy together, where those individuals do want the novelty of something, the newness of something because it's interesting, because it feels like a new ride, a new adventure. But when we focus this and we look at Uranus as not just, okay, it's disrupting something, let it happen. Oh, well, there's no formula. It is how to utilize that ninth house energy and how to utilize the energy in a way in which you are focused. You are experimenting through journey, through study of and experimenting through knowledge. You are going on quests, and whether that means you literally have to go somewhere else or it means that you're going through, an avenue of like, I'm going to try something new in my life. I'm going to try this lifestyle. I'm going to try that lifestyle. I'm going to study this. I believe in this philosophy. You're here to have a range of experiences and let them be broad, but you always want to look at them in terms of, I know what the outcome is for that. Okay. And the sign itself would also help you point you in the right direction. Uranus in 10th. So in early life doesn't have to mean when you're a child. It could mean like early adulthood as well, your teenage years and your early 20s or whatever the case may be. Especially anything before your Saturn return. It feels like things in your goals are not always set by you. You feel like you are kind of a victim in a way to the circumstances of what other people have decided your goals are. Or you could feel sometimes things are abrupt. I started, I stopped. You started, you went away to school, but you had to stop because you take care of your mother or something like that. You were this way in your career and then somebody made a decision, now you have to go here. Or they transferred you to a different location. Your company has different locations all over the country and they transferred you. Something like that, where it feels like your goals, your ambition is kind of stunted sometimes by what other people do or abrupt, sudden situations. So using Uranus as a disruptor, what it means is that eventually in time you come to see how to use that to your benefit. Uranus in your 10th house means ideally you can learn how to adapt to that. How do you learn from different experiences, how to better have goals along the way? No matter what happens, how do I still make sure it's aligned with what I'm envisioning? Remember, Uranus energy, yeah, we're talking about, experimenting and we're talking about innovation and invention, but Uranus is also here to show us a new way. And so through those experiences, You gain more insight into a new way of doing things. Utilize it in a way to grow from it. Utilize it in a way to use your experiences to show how people can adapt to change. How you choose to adapt to sudden things is going to really help you with the trajectory of the rest of your goals and the rest of the way in which you want to be perceived. And we're talking about 10th house. So if you become a victim, so learning to take those opportunities to invent yourself, reinvent yourself. Use that energy instead of saying, oh, woe is me. Use that energy to your own benefit. Reinvent yourself everywhere you go, every situation. Take what you've already learned, what you've already accumulated, that ninth house, the experience, the expertise that you have, and apply it to that 10th house energy, even if something does change or is abrupt for you, right? Using it in a way in which you are the kind of person that shows how do we show up in situations where we do have to change and evolve, and not evolve in a Pluto way, but you're evolving in a way that shows people how to constantly be on the move, forward thinking. You're not staying stagnant in one space. You're able to adapt to the change, the modern changes. You're able to adapt to, changes in society and things like that. As things adapt, you're one who's able to adapt easily to the change in your industries, perhaps. Uranus in 11th. Okay, so this kind of fear around being ostracized or feeling different or feeling things are difficult in social situations. You may feel like you don't always fit in. And the thing about fitting in, a lot of people think, oh, it means nobody was friends with you. That doesn't necessarily mean that. It can mean you had friends, but you never quite felt like you knew how you belonged, or you didn't quite have the right friend group, or you didn't feel like your individuality was accepted. And so with Uranus in the 11th house as a disruptor, it is about, again, Uranus here is the modern ruler. It is about learning how to navigate social situations where you are valued for having unique insight, where you can be yourself, where you can be an individual. And it doesn't mean you don't have anything in common with people. That's not what we're talking about here. But we're talking about the social circles and networks that you belong to. You benefit best when you understand how you are here to push things forward. You are the one that is going to have a different insight, a different way to look at things. And so if you feel like you're out of place in situations, a lot of times it's because you aren't around the most aligned people. You might be around people and you're like, well, we grew up in the same area. We're from the same community. We're from the same background. But really, you might need to be around people who appreciate your unique thought. You might need to be around little people that are strange, different, because they're the ones that are going to embrace and understand you the most. And so, you grew up in a setting or situation where you have these friends and you have these people you've always been around, but you will feel more aligned when you expand that social network, when you expand yourself and allow yourself to hang out with people or deal in situations that could be out of the norm, or could be unique niche types of groups, right? That you then feel that you are accepted because you're able to bring your unique perspective to the audience, instead of settings where you have to kind of fit in and be a certain way for different people. And, and you're the entertainment because you're so different, when really sometimes you also need to seek out individuals where you have shared understandings, shared ideals. All right. Uranus in 12th house. Okay. So as the disruptor, Uranus in 12th house people can sometimes ostracize themselves, especially early on in life, or in some way you want to avoid a crowd, or you want to avoid certain different groups of people. You want to avoid things that feel like you could be judged too much, that there's too much pressure on you to try to perform. So Uranus in 12th house, again, I talk about the 12th house a lot of times, Uranus in terms of like people who can have dream experiences, unique, strange dreams, or unique situations with spirituality and things like that. But Uranus can also bring like weird sleep issues. But in early life, Uranus in 12th can sometimes want to be away. Remember, Uranus symbolizes the collective. And so when Uranus is in the 12th house, there's sometimes something about you that could be isolated. You like being isolated, but usually it's because you've been pushed to isolate, or because you feel in some way, shape, or form there's something about yourself you need to hide. Because if you show it in some way, it is not going to be widely accepted, which is different than 11th house, where 11th house will try to sometimes conform or try early in life to figure it out. Whereas the 12th early on kind of shuts down and says, nope, I'm not doing this. But what that sometimes means is you actually need to utilize that time by yourself to identify what makes you different and what's unique about you, because that is the thing that is going to really take you to the next level, especially when we talk about spiritually, if you're a spiritual person. Uranus in the 12th house, it means that you are able to see unique situations and circumstances and maybe like visualize them, utilizing your energy to not just feel different, not just be different and wallow in that, but also be able to look at things in a way in which you're able to experiment more with things that are outside the norm. You are able to, when you go to retreat, that is the time that you're testing things out. You're testing out what it is that you actually want and like, away from the public, away from other people, away from the 11th house, away from the 4th house. The issue is Uranus in 12th is you can feel like what you really like is so far out there, so strange, so weird, or just not accepted, that you don't really develop and build that out to where it can really benefit you, right? You might be like really talented at something, but you don't want to show people, right? That's a very 12th house type of thing. You're a great artist. You don't want to show people your drawings, right? You are great at, creating something when you need to, or you're really great at, solving problems for your own life. When you have to solve a problem, you're good at it, but you don't show people. Whereas Uranus in 6th house would have to. 12th house, you hide it. You wait until something suddenly happens. So the disrupting energy, the way to disrupt that pattern would be to learn how to take what you do when you're alone and when you're in isolation, and how do you use that to actually apply it to your real life, to outside of that zone? How do you highlight different things? How do you bring that more into the forefront? You need that alone time. This is not saying you need to sacrifice your alone time, but what it means is that when you are experimenting, when you are doing things and you realize that they work, how do you then use that to improve the quality of your life? And I say that all the time. In the 12th house, I spend a little bit more time talking about 12th house placements, because a lot of times the energy hides there. It hides in the 12th house. And it can, because there's a reason you have 12th house placements. But a lot of times we feel stuck or stagnant because that's where the energy goes. But we have all these ideas, you have all these skills, all these traits. And some people, spiritual, highly level, utilize them on the astral plane, or utilize them in a parallel universe, if you're, if you believe that, right? But you don't use it here in the physical world, right? So how do you learn to use some of those things in the physical world to really help you maintain your life and also reach some of your goals?